It is 8:26 on this Tuesday morning. You're watching Breakfast Television. Well, in the news lately, we've heard a lot about emotional infidelity because of this huge thing that's going on between, allegedly, Madonna and Alex Rodriguez. But is that actually true? And by the way, what does emotional infidelity mean? So we've decided to ask Trevor Warren, who is a registered clinical counselor, do a lot of couples work, right?
That's correct.
So what does it mean to have emotional infidelity?
Well, I think the way people define that personally ranges quite a bit depending on how secure their relationship is and what insecurities they might have. So what their tolerance is with how emotionally close somebody can be with another person gets dictated by that.
Okay, but there are some good indicators. Like, we're not talking about like opposite sex being friends here, because it's possible to do that without having any of the emotional infidelity.
I think probably one of the most helpful ways to think about it is that relative to your partner, like if I have an old university friend, say a female comes into town, can I spend an evening with her and have dinner? Probably, as long as I'm pretty connected with my partner. Like the amount of emotional investment and focus, that I think is the best way to define it. If I've got it on somebody else, and I'm not sharing the intimate details that I'm sharing with my friend, and I'm not sharing that with my partner, that's probably a pretty good indicator.
And if you are not, like if your spouse, husband or wife, doesn't know how close that other relationship is, and you're hiding it, that's probably a good indicator.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're finding yourself, if you kind of are feeling a twinge, oh, I shouldn't let my partner know about this conversation that I had, or I'm talking about this, or you're sharing really intimate details that you wouldn't share with your partner or your wife, those are all really good indicators. It's where your heart is. It's where your emotional focus is.
Okay.
And that can slip away, and especially in a relationship where there's a lot of tension or it's flatlined, you're going to find that the tendency for that to occur is much greater.
Is it worse than, a lot of people talk about this being worse than sexual infidelity?
Yes. Interestingly, yeah, absolutely, because sexual infidelity has always been really the yardstick for determining what's been crossing the line.
Yeah.
But emotional infidelity has really been more the forgivable sin, and people tend to turn a blind eye. But really, the emotional bond that you have with somebody and sexual attraction, these things are very independent forces. You can be sexually attracted to somebody and not have an emotional attachment, or you can have an emotional attachment and not be sexually attracted. So, because normally people, when they think somebody has a sexual attraction, it must mean they don't love me. Pairing those things up is not always true.
Right.
And once somebody's emotionally entangled, it's much more difficult to untangle that than a sexual entanglement.
Right. So as a spouse, you should fear that more so than, say, a sexual affair.
Yeah, the emotional fabric, that is really where your heart is most of the time, and where your concentrated efforts of emotional connectedness, that is.
And there's certain indicators that lead to it, right? I mean, there's a reason why it happens with couples.
Well, it's usually a very good indicator that something is amiss in the primary relationship. Your heart probably won't wander. Sexually, you'll wander, because again, these are two very different things, but emotionally, your heart is much less likely to wander if your heart is really engaged with your primary partner.
Right.
Yeah.
And is there ever a point where it goes too far? Like, can they sort of reattach themselves to their partner if they realize what they've done? Like, it's probably inadvertent a lot of the time?
They can.
Yeah.
I think it's more difficult. Like when I'm dealing with affairs with couples and there's been a strictly sexual affair, those are usually much more easy to recover from because it's not really necessarily love related.
Yeah.
But when somebody has emotionally redirected their energy to another person, those can be a lot more challenging to redirect, because oftentimes that's precipitated by 5, 10, 15 years of just feeling flat in the relationship, and they've already moved on.
So there's much less of a chance of recovery.
I would say so.
Okay, so then what can you do if you are aware of this and you don't want to see this happen, but you know that you have lots of friends of the opposite sex? What are your guidelines? What should you do?
Well, one is, I think in this day and age where careers and kids are just taking up so much of our time, a lot of couples, when they get home, they get, I call it the emotional leftovers. They don't spend a lot of time investing a lot of energy, date nights or whatever that is, but you really do have to invest in your relationship time-wise. The other thing is that if you feel like, to guard against this, if you feel like you're having a conversation with a coworker or somebody else that you feel is you're kind of getting some tingles up your spine, or you're kind of liking the strokes that you're getting from them, that's a real clear warning, and you don't want to tell your partner about that.
Yeah.
That's a surefire way that you're probably, if you think you're doing something wrong, you probably are.
Right, so anything where you think that, you know what, I better not tell my spouse about this, that's a bad sign.
And you should tell them.
Good.
That's the very first thing, is just tell them, and then that way it's above board, and then you got something to work with. That's
Yeah.
how I encourage the couples I work with.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Say what's true.
Thank you.